All right, are you ready? Okay. We're still in Lemuria. We'll be very short tonight. We'll be lucky if we even reach an hour. I always say things like that. It's keeping a tradition. And the last talk on Lemuria, I should turn the... Oh, stop everything. I got to... I'm going to wait till the fan shuts off. He says, you're wasting all my tape. We're still in Lemuria, and we're still trying to get rid of the illusions about what Lemuria was. And last time we talked about the idea of evil, or what it was, or the illusion of what it was. And this time we're going to balance it out by looking at good. We decided last time that evil was an intentional adharmony with the divine plan. And that is, we knew better, or it was built into us, what the harmony of cosmos was, but that we intentionally went against that. This time we're going to talk about the idea of good. I'm really pushing hard because I'm developing things that I've thought about for years, but I've never presented them ever before, and it always goes roughly when you do something the first time, because it takes a long time to get familiar with externalizing what your creative thinking is. And the really difficult thing about all of this is that when you do this, you're like in a meditative state for several hours. And when you're in that state, it's peaceful. I've shut the phone off. I'm completely quiet. I'm all by myself alone. And I develop an idea. And so much of the idea is rare that by the time that you have objectified what you're going to objectify, a lot has been very nicely unfolded in your consciousness. But then when you try to externalize it, only a small, crude percentage of it comes out. Okay. Several thoughts also about what good is. In fact, I think the effect is the same. There's a reflection. My experience is that when I was a young man, for a few years anyway, I literally tried to be an evildoer. Not an evildoer, but I tried to do whatever would be advantageous to me personally, or what seemed advantageous to me personally. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't be as bad as I wanted to be because I didn't have the heart to do it. And then I had an experience, and I tried to be as good as I could be, understanding or apperceiving inside of myself what a correct way of action is and what is a positive thing for the world. And I find out that I can't do that as well as I would like to either. That's much more worth working on. The whole phenomenon, if you'll notice, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on ethics and morality, especially at this critical period of Lemuria, when we're talking about human history in the cosmos, or our history as human beings in the cosmos, as opposed to other kinds of history and evolution that we've gone through. And a reason for that is because I think that is where we are most behind in our evolution. That intelligently we have all sorts of developments, like we can make bombs that we can't control, and we have all sorts of other knowledge that we could use very much to the positive but don't. And if you look at the lives of all the great world teachers and you look at their teachings, they do not put a lot of emphasis on social issues or on scientific issues or even philosophical issues. That comes out, and there are a few close students that are drawn to that side of it, but every great spiritual teacher that has been has always emphasized and focused on moral and ethical development of human beings, because that's what is most necessary to bring us to a state where we're whole. That's where we're most behind. My experience has been in trying to be good and understanding all of the principles that are involved in goodness. I have come to learn that an initiation into the truth of existence as a moral being, as an ethical being. By that I don't mean just following some laws, but I mean understanding principles and living in a positive way with them. You automatically are initiated into evil. This is, I think, one of the things that comes from the knowledge of good and evil. That once we understand the freedom that we have, and once we have within us the temptation to act selfishly and to reproduce the conditions of the fall over again and again in our consciousness, that we can't help but to experience something in life and not be exposed to both sides of it. So we're basically going to talk about what is good. Obviously, this is going to be a very unusual ideas of good that we're going to talk about tonight, because we're going to talk about Lemurian ideas of good. Good is also a relative. It's relative to a divine plan. A divine plan that is not only outside of us, but a divine plan that is inside of us. For I don't know how many weeks now or how many years now we've been looking at the mysteries version of the creation of the cosmos and our part in it from the creation. And we've been placing emphasis on the principles that are inside of evolution and to what purpose those principles act and how those principles are found inside of us. That everything that we do is a miniature microcosmic reproduction of the cosmos. This course is leading toward a practical spirituality. The third part of this course, if we ever get to it, will deal with different forms of meditation and different forms of action in life and how those forms of meditation have to be based on the principles in humans and in the cosmos so that we can act out harmoniously with the purpose of the cosmos. So there is this great big divine cosmology, and this cosmology lives in us. Everything that is in God, everything that is in the cosmos is in us. And so good is relative to our awareness of the plan and working with the plan. And it's obvious, there are a lot of parallels to what we've talked about last time. Remember I said last time that the most obvious example of evil is to just go out into a countryside and see how human creations and human manifestations are not an integral part of nature. And they not only stand out apart from nature, but they degrade nature. And obviously, with the same kind of relativity, a human good would be something that enforces the purposes of the cosmos in nature on all of the different spiritual planes. And it would then be transparent. Like if a person were a truly good person, they would be exactly like a truly good artist. A truly good artist is capable of producing a work of art that is so beautiful and represents the beauty so clearly that you don't notice the art. It becomes transparent. In fact, for the art or the acting or whatever form of art that it is, if it stands in between the viewer and a proper appreciation of the aesthetic reality, it is inhibitory to its own purpose. And so like a truly good act would be so harmonious that there would be no friction to it, and it would be almost unnoticeable because it would be fitting right into the cosmos. A second thing, speaking generally about the quality of good, is that it must also be intentional. This painful kind of self-consciousness that we have, where we come to an awareness of self that is born out of feeling the repercussions and the retributions of misactions, adharmonious actions, that self-consciousness that is born out of that leads to a very wide-awake intentional activity. And anything that we can't accidentally, we can't unconsciously do good because we have chosen to be wide awake. In fact, I'm such an advocate of waking self-consciousness that I'd like to be wide awake all the time. That's why I can't go for anything that deals with the inducement of a trance or anything like that as a spiritual activity, because that's the loss of spiritual consciousness. And if I could go without sleeping and didn't completely destroy my health in doing it, I would do it. Because the more we can be awake, the more awake we can be, and the more intentionally we can do what we do to work with things. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like learning to play a piece of music. The first times that you play it through, you just have to be able to perform and execute what is there. And after that, you gain a proficiency with it, and it becomes part of you. And then you can bring in intention. Then you can interpret and you can give yourself to it, and even though you're playing the same notes as you've been playing all along, your intentional consciousness being put into your artistic activity brings out much more out of it and out of you. So again, the second thing about good then is it has to also be intentional. The third thing about it is that it is a matter of action. One of the things we didn't discuss the last time when we were talking about Lemuria was that as a matter of what is called the fall of humanity, or the last of the falls, and that is the Great Fall, the Hindus and the Chaldeans have many successive falls. Every time that we moved into a deeper plane of existence, they called that a fall. But the one where we intentionally hardened the universe more than it was meant to be and brought ourselves into the blindness that we now exist in, that this fall was as a consequence of action. We did something, and we jumped the gun in doing something. From a spiritual point of view, it's much better to misact than to do nothing at all. And by the same token, action, the one can, you know what I'm trying to say, one can't be good just by sitting there and being so good that you're good for nothing, in a very simple, down-to-earth way. All right, we've gotten a few simple ideas out of the way. This leads us to something like Buddha's, I think it's the Signambra Sutra, where Buddha talks about the difference between the seer, the object that is seen, and the vision. And the same thing is true with regard to good. There is an intention, there is a deed itself, and there is the doer. Before the fall, the intention already existed in us. I don't know how to say it. This is so hard. When we are a living part of the creation of the cosmos, and that creation exists in us as we have existed in it since the very beginning, then all of the intentions of the cosmos are also built into us. Which means then the intention behind the deed really, for a long time, didn't belong to us. It was just in us because we were in the cosmos. So it breaks down that we have the deed and the doer of the deed. We're coming to a very big, simple dichotomy. So it's time to discuss divisions and dichotomies. But before we do that, we have to talk about an event that we've been talking about several other times in different ways. And that division is the basic division of all of humanity that took place at that time and exists until this time. That is, some of the people focused their intelligence one way, and they produced bodies that were basically masculine. And they were met, an equal number of people produced bodies that were basically feminine. And since then, it is sort of like you cannot produce one part of a pole without producing the other part of a pole. And once that activity took place, that we were no longer single-celled beings, but where we were focused to put part of our intelligence one way, either more inward or more outward, then this caused a division, it caused an opening up of the physical form of the human so that it was indeed a pole rather than being all tied together in a circle. It became a pole, and this is called the separation of the sexes. It was, as we remember, there for several purposes, so that part of the energy could be used for building and perfecting bodies, because it was necessary to cooperate to build bodies now so that we could continue to function in the external world. And part of the energy was turned inward to awaken spirituality and to awaken divine attributes. Now, the bodies or the forms or the formations of males and females are altogether different than the spiritual consciousness that inhabits them. That is, we have all been many times in male bodies and we've all been many times in female bodies. We're talking about times now that go back millions of years, and no one person is attached to any one kind of a body. Now, most people have the notion about Lemurians is that they sort of look just like us, but they probably wore different clothing. That's thoroughly wrong. In early Lemuria, as it's described by the clairvoyants, at least the more reasonable clairvoyants, there was a situation that our bodies were much more fluid. They were, and I shouldn't say fluid, they're much more etheric, much more indefinite than they are now. Plus, they were much coarser. I don't know how to say it. something can be more ethereal and coarser at the same time. That is, the refinement of the materials that we were working with was much less developed than it is now. And so we were thin and ethereal, but we were coarsely so, and we were still throwing off the animal moods so that we could become human-like. And so our bodies were described as being something like somewhere between, if you could imagine a form that was somewhere between a dog and a lemur and a kangaroo. There were attributes of all of those qualities in the body. But the body wasn't solid like this yet. It was still solidifying. So you can understand why the idea, because it was coarse, because it was very much undeveloped, we've been talking all along about the tree of knowledge. We had to be kept away from the tree of life because, I'm using the biblical terms now, because if we had understood the tree of life, we would have been able to perpetuate bodies forever, just like there are some people now who get very spiritually developed. They can keep a body alive for hundreds of years, almost as long as they want at will. And if we had kept alive a dog-like body that was very undeveloped and had not much of a brain, almost that tiny head like the kangaroos have relative to the rest of the body, we would have been in terrible shape. All right, so that's one thing. The separation of the sexes was, we were into all kinds of strange animal shapes compared to what we have now. A second illusion is, it's always said, not only in the Western tradition, that is the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, that Eve, or the feminine bodies, were created out of the rib of Adam, meaning out of the side or one end of the pole of Adam. That's wrong. It was just the other way around, that the females existed before the males did, because it's a biological fact that in all kingdoms, plant, animal, and human, that species can exist and continue to exist where there are only females but not males. So the reality was that Adam was probably created out of Eve's rib rather than Eve out of Adam's rib, if you want to take the story and put it that way. It's the female was differentiated first because it was necessary for perpetuating the physical form. The male body was produced later almost sort of as a differentiating factor, and almost in some ways you could look at it, if you're looking in terms of really close Scotch necessity, the male body was basically a luxury, and it wasn't at all a big-time necessity. Interesting, there are also a lot of corollary illusions that go along with this. Like the prejudices have it that those in the female body are more talkative, whereas the whole power of speech, this is one of the ways you can tell somebody who's had a sex change operation whether they were originally male or female. If there's an Adam's apple, so to speak, if it's a female with an Adam's apple, it wasn't born that way. You know what I'm saying? That the Adam's apple is one of the great differentiating factors. You can, by the use of hormones and surgery and things like that, you can produce breasts, and you can change the tone of the skin and all of that. But you can't. The feet are different, and the Adam's apple is a big standout difference. In fact, it really is that the power of speech and the talkativeness was much more focused on men than it was on women. And then there's the other thing that is also pertinent since this time. There is what is called, again by the biblical misunderstanding, it is called the curse of the blood, menstruation. And this is supposedly a special curse on women. And actually, from the true scientific point of view, it's a special blessing to women. Because obviously, the women are outwardly feminine, but inwardly masculine, and that means that they can produce much more blood, and they're much stronger inwardly, and that is what allows for this build-up, tremendous build-up of inward psychic energy, as well as an inward build-up of blood, which has to be let. And it's not really a curse, and it's not really a sign of weakness, but instead it's really a sign of strength. I mean, breaking all kinds of illusions about Lemuria, because we have all sorts of misunderstandings about the nature of the cosmos. You know that their men are starting to have babies now? The first man is pregnant with a baby. This is an aside. There is a very extreme homosexual in Brazil that, using his own sperm, had an egg fertilized and had it attached to the outside wall of the stomach. And it's developing that way, and it's obviously going to have to be cesarean, but can you imagine what's going to... Because even with the vital body of the female being that positively charged, having a child takes an enormous amount of energy out of that vital body. You know that a woman will start losing teeth and will have a lot of difficulties when she starts having children. But can you imagine what that's going to do to a male's vital body to have something like that? It's just going to be devastating. Okay. Another conclusion is that another illusion that follows a logical pattern, when it is dispelled, the illusion is that the feminine body, or those in the feminine body, were inferior. And because of that inferiority, they led the men, or those that were in men's bodies, astray. That obviously is untrue, because it inherent right in what is being said, there had to be a certain state of advancement and ability to see the facts of nature with regard to the creative energy, or even to have interactions with the Lucifers to bring about this activity in order to be able to do the leading. And so that's a very, very that's a very great misunderstanding. Okay, so the current state of advancement that is in the male's body, you know, like the dominance of males in various activities in the world now, has less to do with the superiority of the male body than the adaptation or the function of the male's body with regard to the phase of evolution that we are in, than it does to do with any advancement or deferment of the female's body. Okay, so those are a few illusions that I wanted to clear up. I did a few of them last week, but because you run into these things all the time with people with religious prejudices and all sorts of other prejudices. So we'll just pass on now to... Now, we're talking about the separation of the sexes all over again. This is about the third or fourth time now that we come back to some of the same facts of nature. This is what's beautiful about this. You can come back to the same themes again and again, and each time that you come back, you see it from a different point of view, and it all becomes all the more meaningful and the reasons for things that apparently you just took for granted or that looked so obvious before, you begin to understand with greater depth. Now, we've talked several times about human beings with regard to the solar evolution in which we are passing through, which is what we're dedicating almost the entire course to, because anything more grand than that is so far beyond us that it would be foolish to try and ponder it with our consciousness as limited as it is now. Our greatest responsibility is to the work that we are in now, and that is our evolution in the solar cosmos. The way we have talked about it before, we've said that human beings began their evolution in the mineral-like state when the cosmos was in its first state, and that we are the same age as the age of the cosmos, whereas there are some beings that began their evolution in a previous system, like those that are one stage ahead of us, like the angels, actually began their evolution in a totally different system and are now continuing on in this creative activity, whereas phased off behind us is the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom by one or two stages behind us, and they entered into their evolution later in this stage. And that means our waking self-consciousness, our beginning of a creativity, is at this time most ripe. We've said it again and again that the changes in the cosmos, we've said that as human thought or as human consciousness became more distinct and more clear and more separative, this is when this occurred in our cosmos at the time that the planets were separated within the sun. Now we're going to look back at that same fact again. We said last time we were talking about what had happened is we said that the moon was ripped off of the earth. We've said that a few times back, but we didn't go into the genesis of that. But the real genesis of that is also in human thought. That is in early Lemuria, when we were separating and the sexes became separated, and we were influenced by the Lucifer spirits to become immortal by using the divine procreative and creative force on our own before we knew how to use it or when to use it. That a consequence of that was, with us still being much more inward and clairvoyant, we were naturally magical. And with those natural magical abilities, we took that energy and we used it to devastate each other. When we talked about last week about the first sin, the sin of selfishness, and the sin of selfishness with regard to generation and creation, leading to the second sin, the sin of murder, and, carrying on down the line like dominoes, most of this was perpetrated inwardly. It was not perpetrated as an outward deed the way we do most of our ills now. In fact, I don't even think we do most of it now. We're doing more of it intellectually, and we have power over people through basic social power that we control inwardly. But the result of this was that some of the humans then got so involved in the selfishness. It's ironic when we at the same time that we discovered the ability to procreate and knew how to use that voluntarily, but because we did it selfishly, by the same stroke we understood how to do the opposite, how to kill. This is very clearly, like in a low-down way, in a very simplistic way, this is what a lot of Bible thumpers say when they're talking about by sin you know death. And so we understood procreation of form and destruction of form at the same time. But some people became fascinated with the separative quality, so much so that they started doing each other in by terrible magical acts, and they tried to change the condition of the cosmos by magical acts to make it more favorable to their own pleasant state of existence. And as a consequence, remember we said last time that when we chose experience over the meaning of experience and broke up a balance so that we lost the clairvoyance and we had only the beginnings of the outward sensation. And we said that that plowed us deeper in matter than was intended, and it hardened us more than was intended, and that the turning the sexual energy outward with such extremity resulted in everything in the earth becoming harder, including our vehicles. Well, the effect of the magical activity was many times more pronounced. That the taking of the basic spiritual essence and using it not only to create bodies, but using it to destroy other bodies had such a hardening effect that this is what produced the hardening of the over-hardening of the earth that was the moon. And those beings that were associated with that were failures. They couldn't keep on in evolution because they had inverted themselves and they saw their divinity by standing against the divine rather than seeing the divinity of being like the divine. Like to know oneself is to know God. And so when that was the case, the moon had to be separated from the earth. But the effect of that was, see, it isn't an accident when a moon gets thrown off or the place in the solar system where a planet congeals. We've talked about Bode's law, or Bode's law, saying that if this is the sun, that there are various places, that it's a regular arithmetic proportion, that there are regular places in the solar system, you can make a lovely little arithmetic formula for it, where a planet is going to be born. And the same thing is true with when we set the moon apart from the earth. That is saying that that had something to do with the internal consciousness and evolutionary adaptation of human beings. So, what we're saying is, it's a common known fact, even to regular physiologists, that the whole phase, the whole timing of everything that happens in the womb is ruled by the moon. Whereas the vitalization is ruled by the sun. And so the moon and sun were placed the earth was placed relative to the sun, and the moon was placed relative to the earth at such a distance so that their influences were optimal for human evolution, according to our consciousness now. If you have too much sun, we couldn't exist. We couldn't evolve in the sun because the vibrations are too high for us. We would disintegrate. We don't have enough concentration to hold it together. If the moon had stayed that close that it was still part of the earth yet, we would have become fossilized human beings and we couldn't have evolved. And so they're set off at the perfect distances so that we can develop bodies that are of the right degree of hardness, commensurate with our level of evolutionary intelligence. Okay, that's the simple idea of it. In fact, these are some of the things that have caused great havoc. That the great sorcerers of Lemuria produced the moon, and the great sorcerers of Atlantis tried to move the moon around so that in favor of their own destiny. This describes a lot of other things, you know. If you look right now, the moon is very, very slowly moving away from the Earth. And the net effect is that we're going to become more and more physically ethereal. And obviously, since the moon and Earth put drag on each other, you know, time is speeding up. That is, the Earth is spinning faster. It's only a very, it's thousandths of a second per century, but it is speeding up because the moon is producing less drag on it. And so, like the tempo of things is speeding up, and it's all tied together. So, okay, we now understand then that we have two forces, primary forces. Astrologically, everything is relative to the sun and to the moon in the influences on us. Like everything, like the Native Americans said it, like somebody this is the moon when the strawberries come ripe, or this is the moon when the deer move this way, or something like that. Everything is accomplished through the sun and the moon. And human evolution is similar. So the sun and the moon represent the two poles of human experience, the male and the female pole. So we have sun, or should I do it the other way around? Let's put it this way. This says that outwardly the body of the female and the work of the female is lunar. The body of the male is solar. Internally, the female is solar and the male is lunar. So this says that the outward activity, now mind you, this is more in Lemuria, it's present to this day yet. It's true that, like in biorhythms, that the females are much more subject to the 28-day rhythm, and the males much more to the 30 or 33-day rhythms that are solar in nature. That the physical bodies, but this is all more primarily in Lemuria. As time goes on, when we develop the laws inside of ourselves, we become laws unto ourselves, and we're then not identified with gender or body type or anything like that. So this says then that the work of the woman outwardly in the world is ruled by the moon, that there is much more astrological influence for the moon in the feminine body and much more solar influence in the outer body by the sun. This also describes why the vital body of the woman is so much stronger, because it's positive and solar and it can do all of the building work, whereas men are very flimsy. They've got the outward lurch of power, but when it comes to the staying or sustaining power in life, women live longer, and when it comes to endurance matches, women always win that because they have the stronger internal vital body. All right. Oh, we're almost done. So this also leads to the moral work, or the actual evolutionary work. Because at this time, human beings are so, like you can't think of a person having a family life and a professional life and a social life. Those kinds of distinctions, you can't think of somebody being more artistic than scientific or more religious than either scientific or artistic. When we're talking about Lemuria, we're talking about a consciousness that is still so unified and still so undifferentiated that you can't talk about moral work versus more material work, but we're going to just look at the emphasis in that regard. If you were in a female body, what produced an awareness of the physical world especially in the building of bodies. Literally, now this even exists and goes on to this day yet. You'll be able to see all sorts of things that live in modern culture that are still atavisms that go back millions of years. The physical work of females was to build bodies. And therefore, having babies and building healthy babies that is what we did. Our consciousness, in terms of coming into physical existence when we were in a female's body, because obviously there were many more dangers then, and we had much less awareness. Like you're getting burned up by molten lava and things like that, because we weren't perceptibly aware of the external world, and the conditions were extremely trepidatious, and we were sort of left on our own when we said we wanted to be on our own by taking that power unto ourselves. So there was a lot of procreative activity going on. And so it was good to have babies. It was good to produce healthy bodies. In another sense, what went on inwardly in the developing of babies in the womb and in the building of the bodies themselves, because mind you, we did not have all of the differentiated organs that we have now. We didn't at all have a nervous system like we have now. That was done by the magical work of the feminine consciousness turning inward and building bodies. So what was good then is what produced bodies, healthy bodies, and what produced evolution in bodies. What was good for males is what made one capable of projecting differentiation in bodies. It still is true to this day that the sexual determination is produced by the male, and in most species the characteristics are determined by the male. That is, like if you go out to the American Breeders Association out here, they don't look at the parentage of all of the cows, but they look at the parentage according to bulls. There'll be somebody like Ramses that they'll carry through 40 or 60 generations, and Ramses will be alive 200 years after his physical body is dead. You understand what I'm trying to say? That the projection in the physical body through the physical stuff, the projection of self with strength through the procreative function was good. Literally, we were like breed stock, and most of what was good was a much more biological factor than it was an intellectual factor as it is now. Also, what was good in the male's experience was what projected a need for differentiation. Mind you now, the female was capable of building the differentiation inside of the body, but there had to come an impetus for something outside for something, for different conditions, for different goals, for different ends. And that drive for something external, even though it was like a mania-like, even though it was a separation from the family, as it still is in lots of, in fact, most animals, that there's a separation from the family on the part of the male, that same quality is what produced the variety and the change and the need for the body to evolve in itself. So whenever we were in females' bodies, we were learning these things as good. Whenever we were in males' bodies, we were learning the more differential qualities as good. That's one major categorization. Awareness of the body and its relationship to the world. A second major category of what was good was outwardness. Again, for the female body, all of us that were involved in female bodies, to be able to be receptive to a setting of nature was good. And to be able to not only pick up what a setting of nature was, but to be able to get the mood of it. Now, mind you, a lot of these things are really present to this day. It's tied together with the first activity of goodness. You know, that a lot of people are delivering children in water now because it's a better environment for the child to come into, because it's more pleasant and soothing and things like that. And when we're talking about having a home environment, and through that home environment being able to produce a healthier child. These are things that go all the way back to Lemuria. Only in those times they were exceptionally important because the whole advancement of humanity depended on that. That is to say that by being able to be in touch with an environment and to sense its mood, and to thereby, in relation to that mood of that environment, produce a body that was conducive to that kind of environment, was good. On the other hand, what was the activity of the male? What was good is whatever produced a specific outward experience. Pain. Therefore, to be able to walk onto a lava bed, to be able to have, literally, it's really crude. This is going to be a strange idea of what most people think good is, but to have something like our modern boxing matches, what is now the most retrograde form of human activity, trying to harm someone, was good then. Not the trying to harm, but the ability to feel pain. Because when you felt pain, you were aware of the external world. You can see what happened when we once chose experience over meaning of experience. We found ourselves being really dipped into matter. And therefore, the more we could become aware of our new environment, the better it was for our evolution. So therefore, things like slashing each other, even roasting each other on spits, I'm not saying that it was a nice thing to do, or by our own standards now, but whatever made us aware. See, because our consciousness was still so inward, and we were so blissed out. You know, we could still see ourselves as divine, and we were foggy that we needed this experience to become externalized to become aware of our environment, and therefore anything that got through to someone was good. Now, that same thing works. There are certain types of children who can't read. They can't focus. They can't concentrate to read. And principles like that still work yet. With some of those children, if you yell at them and scream at them at the top of your, you tell them you're not angry with them, but you yell at them and you scream at them to get them to concentrate and focus their attention. They make leaps forward in their reading ability. And something like this is what took place in Lemuria. So like anything then, like obviously the solar lesson, external lesson for males was to stand in there and be brave. There's still things like that. You can go to Native American sun dances every summer. You can go to North Dakota, and every male must still, if he wants to stay there for the duration of the sun dance, must stand before everyone and have skin taken. Even if it's only just a little patch of skin. There are some people that stand out there in the hot sun and they have like skin taken. They'll have a strip of skin taken that'll go all the way across their body, up one arm and across the chest and down the other side. I have a friend that attended a sun dance and was taken in by the natives. And he said, they took skin on me. And I said, I took it. But he said, I couldn't believe some of the things I was seeing. That, these are atavisms that go way, way, way back to an early time. And to be able to be brave and to stand in there. See, we're doing just the opposite now. The New Agers are trying to walk across coals in a state of hypnosis so they don't feel the coals. In those times, they walked across the coals to feel them. It goes just the other way around. It's a very different way of things now. And the illusions some of the illusions that we have about things now, it's the same thing as is true about sex. The only time in those times that we knew that there was an outside being there was in the intense sensation of sex. And for some people now, they don't know that there's an inside being except in the intense emotional sensation of sexuality. And it's going just the other way around now. Okay, all of this is only on the earth plane. In regard to all evolution, we've mentioned this before, there are three purposes, at least purposes that we can talk about in a really simple way, because most of this is so profound and so deep and so purposeful that it goes beyond our intelligence to be able to fully understand it, much less to talk about it. Experience. One of the chief reasons for our existence is experience. One of the second reasons, soul power. And the third reason, of the simple reasons for our existence, is to develop creativity. So what we're talking about is experience. What was good is what gave us an experience predominantly of the external world. But from that experience, a soul power was developed. This is where it's going to be a little bit difficult for Julie because this has been going on for a long time. You may be familiar with some of the ideas from the Indian studies, but it's a little bit different. We recognize, we said that way back in the earlier periods of existence, when we were mineral-like, and when we were mineral-like and we were no more dense than a thought, we said that the experience of being molded by the gods and by providing resistance, we were able to produce forms for the gods to make and metamorphize. From the experience of taking form through resistance and being unresistant enough to evolve those or metamorphize those forms, from that experience we developed the power of will in the divine spirit. Then after a long rest, when the cosmos came out again and got as dense as desire, we went through a plant-like existence in that we could produce vitality and life. And we not only then produced forms, but those forms were capable of growth. And from the experience of growth, in spirit we developed the ability to imagine and to have a spirit of life. So we then had the masculine divine spirit and the feminine life spirit. And the whole cosmos went to sleep again. And this time it came out and it was as dense as vitality, as energy, as ether. And then we went through an animal-like existence where our forms could now separate from the earth and move around, and we had the motive power of feeling. That separation of body, the experience of that, led eventually to the awakening of an individual self in spiritual consciousness. So then we had a threefold body and a threefold spirit. And then the whole cosmos went to sleep again, and we came out, and we're talking about how things have come out now in the last few millions or maybe even very few billions of years. And we now have the situation where we have a threefold spirit and we have a threefold body, and there is, from this experience that we're having in Lemuria, the pain is sinking in, and it's not sinking in shallowly, it's sinking in deeply. When we, by intention, went against the plan, the free will involved in that meant that the spirit was beginning to come into the physical, so that we could actually be in our bodies and look out of them and see the grandeur of the world. But in Lemuria, this process was very vague yet. We were sort of associated with our bodies and really not in them. And so you can see why the process of being able to take a body and by a demi-conscious effort to produce a baby in it, or to have experience excruciating pain, would make us more associated with our bodies so that we could come in and to wake up. That was one of the effects. That's why those things were considered good. One of the other effects was that the experience there led to the beginning of an awakening of spiritual awareness in ourselves, where we began to notice ourselves as divine spiritual beings. And so, as a consequence, the lunar solar effect had a transcendent quality to it. So that in the phenomenal worlds there was one kind of good in one kind of experience, but in the transcendent there was another kind. So there are a set of double doubles. First we have a set of doubles. We had the birth of progeny. And this birth of progeny, I don't know how to say this now. The lunar force, the divine feminine, is imagination. So that when we look at the moon in a spiritual sense, relative to the spiritual feminine, it is producing an imagination. The divine quality of the solar force is the force of will. And the two work together in complete harmony, such that you can't tell whether the imagination is drawing the will out or the will is moving the imagination when an imaginative form is developed. So we have then, using the twin forces of imagination and will that are being awakened through the Lemurian experience of good and evil, of good basically is what we're talking about. On one level, on the material level, we produce the birth of children. But you see, before this, we were sort of an amorphous one. All of humanity was one. We didn't recognize differentiation within it. We didn't even really recognize the one. We recognized in a vague way that we were part of something. Then we broke down into pairing. That is to say, we broke into the males and female type of experience. And out of the birth of the male-female, we produce children. Out of the union of will and imagination, there was the birth of individuality. The two go hand in hand. It's so much now that when we look at a separate body, like the Bible said, we looked at our body and we were ashamed. We looked at how, when we separated ourselves, it's gone so far now that the birth of the physical body has led us to believe that even our spiritual self is separate and apart from everything. You know what I'm trying to say? That we don't recognize that there is a spiritual unity between all of us. It's me first, or I am what counts. Okay. So out of the birth of progeny, on the phenomenal level, there are the children themselves and a personality. The personality being, remember when we talked a long time ago, we have to go back to some of the technical things now, we said that those that had a stratification in the desire body, in the astral body, so that they could have a separation in the upper part or in the more developed part, I shouldn't say the more developed, but the more lofty part of the desire body was implanted the germ of personality, which is sort of like an instinctive personal ego. That was born in association with children. Like, I am producing children. On the other hand, the birth of the individuality as a transcendent experience that results from the soul power awakening the spirit results in sense of self in a higher sense, and it results in the birth of God in the highest sense. You see what I'm trying to say? That when you can produce separate bodies and see yourself as a creator of those bodies and separation of those bodies, that leads to personality development. And as a consequence of all of the activities of Lemuria, we awakened to spiritual selfhood. But when we awakened to spiritual selfhood, we then could partake of the divine, and the idea, this goes right back to what we were talking about the last time, when we were talking about that for some people, they discovered the birth of self, and it was all in the personal, intuitive personality, and therefore they saw their divinity as just as good as the divine, because they were so selfish that they flattened and brought everything down to their own level, and they became inverted. And instead of seeing the divine in the macrocosm as something to awe and be revered by and to be lifted up by stages to approximating that, they set themselves against it, and that by setting themselves against the divine plan, they made themselves stronger in resistance. So with the birth of the self also comes the birth of the realization of the unity of the divine and our proportion into it. Now this is only, like in Lemurian times, this is all very vague. But again, we're talking about, this is why we're taking 3 talks on Lemuria, this being the last one finally. Why it's so important, because this is the inception of when all of this is born, and the way you plant the seed is the way all of humanity developed, and our coming out of the human experience and entering back into being divine, creative demigods depends on how well we fulfill the initial activity in the separative process. Okay. And so on the one hand, all of this resulted into 2 other things. It made us aware of egocentricity, and it made us aware of shame, in some cases, guilt. So all of these things, like when they looked at themselves and they were naked and they were ashamed and they covered themselves up, which is certainly a materialistic illusion, because you can't, the realization wasn't there that you couldn't cover up the soul. You know what I'm trying to say? Because it was all there. It's all always there, present to everyone. We still have that thing yet when we think we can cover up our deeds without realizing that what we are is there. And we think whatever we can hide from the cops, we can get away with. All right. So all of this is in Lemurian times the separation, but the awakening of the individuality and of the personality, of the within and of the without, is all very vague. But there is a tension that's forming. You see, there was the polarization that there was between male and female, leads, and the specialized differentiation that comes about as a consequence of that differentiation, leads to a polarization between the awareness of the spiritual and the material, of the within and of the without, and it leaves a sort of tension there. It also leads to the differentiation that we began to talk about, the differentiation between the doer and the deed. It hasn't all been unified yet at this point. It is separated between the doer and the deed. And so when we're talking then about the eating of the tree of the fruit, eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we're talking about a whole dichotomization process. And we're saying that the differentiations are good because they're piecemeal, bringing us to be aware of reality. In fact, some whole systems, like quite a bit of the Chinese system, for example, is based completely on the differentiations between the male and the female. And it's a whole binary world. It's a very digital world broken into twos all together. They've never gotten to other colorings and flavorings and things like that, which we're going to start talking about next time. So we can understand a lot of simple things. In essence, we're understanding our place in the whole cosmos through all of this, because this is the beginning. This is the conception of basic self-understanding altogether. So when you talk to the person on the street, and you ask them, what is the meaning and purpose of life? You just go downtown Barneveld and talk to somebody and say, well, what do you do with life? What's the meaning and purpose of life? And they say, well, you get married and you have children. And at first that seems an awfully inane thing. But you can see that in the experience of that, there's much more. In a very fundamental cosmic level, there's much more, as well as in the details of the experience and all the responsibilities in doing. And we're saying that the whole birth of self is in that whole process. And it's really interesting in all of this that now, then we took having children as a way to become immortal. We took it as a selfish deed because we didn't know anything about the physical. Well, Lucifer came along and said, we can make you immortal. You can make new bodies whenever you want. He said, hey, that's a great thing. We'll be immortal. And we did it as a selfish deed. Now the flip over has come so that we're understanding the very process of individuation. I talk to a lot of people that don't know anything about mysticism, and certainly don't hear it in their church. You talk to these people. You don't lay down any dogmas or anything like that. You listen to them, and they, through seeing their children all the way from birth being differentiated, being very unique individuals, from seeing that all the way through, they begin to understand the whole process of individuation. What I'm trying to say is, like even in the simple things of life, that what is going on every day, it's there. All right. So we have a kind of completeness now. We have a kind of tension. We understand good as a voluntary doing of a deed, and the doing of a deed that brings us into harmony with reality, even though that doing those deeds involve, you can see then, for the females, it was not only just a matter of being receptive to an environment and to a mood and being able to build bodies out of that receptivity. It's an actual awakening to imagination. And then when we were in males' bodies, it was not just enough to know about, to have specific wants outside and to become keenly aware of those wants through pain. It's almost like we wanted to fight. If you look at animals to this day, sometimes animals want to fight. I'm thinking particularly around mating time. This is the way the female chooses the good hereditary stock. Whoever wins the fight, and sometimes even have to fight the female, is the way the choice is made. Not only was it a matter of just feeling the pain, it was a matter of developing a will to stand in there with that pain. So that if a person was a brave and was an individual and was able to take pain and to be a warrior all at the same time, that's all bound together. And this all takes place at the age in life, around puberty, when a person comes into those activities in life in primitive, very simple human society. So it's all tied together. All right. So at this point, then, we have this tension between the transcendental and phenomenal, but there is a waking up on both planes, and the two are drawing together. And we're going to take that theme in one of the talks on Atlantis. There will only be 2 talks on Atlantis, and maybe I'll try to do it all in one. I'm not sure. So next time we get together and talk, it's going to be talk about Atlantis. And it's going to be a very delicate subject. And so next time when we come to think about these things, it's very important that we have open minds and especially open hearts, because we have to deal with some realities of existence that exist, and we also have to clean up a number of misunderstandings and prejudices about them. And so we'll carry this all a step further, and one or two talks on Atlantis, and then one or two talks on our times, and then we'll start talking about initiation and alchemy and future evolution, and hopefully be able to bring back everything that we had in the involutionary part of evolution, and see it how it comes out in creative evolution, and then how all of our principles can work toward that end. And that's it.